Welcome back to Carneades.org. Today we're going to be looking at one of my favorite arguments in the entirety of philosophy. It's found in a short story called What the Tortoise Said to Achilles by Lewis Carroll, and it challenges the very foundations of logic on which we base any and all arguments. If you are unfamiliar with the story, I would suggest you read it now. It's available free, online, and I also have a video recitation. The story plays with the idea of Zeno's paradox, that Achilles could never catch a tortoise because he would have to run an infinite number of ever-shrinking distances. However, clearly, Achilles is able to pass the tortoise, but only because the distances are forever getting smaller. Playing with this, the tortoise challenges Achilles. What if the distances were ever getting larger? What would you do then? Achilles, of course, would never be able to catch the tortoise. This sets the stage for the argument the tortoise is about to present. Now, this argument is never presented in premise-conclusion form for a very good reason, because it would be self-defeating were it presented so. I'm going to present it here simply for us to better understand the argument. This is a rough presentation, and it shouldn't be taken as the end-all, be-all. Were it to be presented in such a way, it would look something like this. In order for one to assent to the conclusion of a valid argument, for example, P implies Q, one must assent to a premise that states that the premises imply the conclusion. For example, P and P implies Q imply Q. Adding a premise merely creates a new, longer conditional to which one must assent. This will continue ad infinitum, forever. In order to assent to the conclusion of a single argument, one must assent to an infinite number of propositions. We cannot assent to the conclusion of any argument, therefore, because we can't assent to an infinite number of propositions with our small human brains. Like I said, this argument is clearly self-defeating. If we can't assent to the conclusion of any argument, we can't assent to this conclusion. Therefore, instead of offering an argument, Lewis Carroll gives a lovely demonstration of the way that this would work. So imagine we're taking a couple of propositions from Euclid. Things that are equal to the same are equal to each other, and the two sides of this triangle are things equal to the same. And we want to conclude the two sides of this triangle are equal to each other. In order to do this, we have to assent to C, that A and B imply Z. We have to assent to the fact that, in fact, these premises do imply the conclusion. If we didn't assent to that fact, we couldn't conclude Z. The problem is, now we've added another premise, we also have to assent to D. A and B and C all imply Z. If we didn't assent to that, we couldn't conclude Z. And so on and so forth. For something more concrete and a little more difficult to say, let's try this with modus ponens. For example, we take the premises P and P implies Q, and we want to conclude Q. But in order to do this, we must assent to the premise that P and P implies Q do in fact imply Q. However, still to assent to Q, we also need to assent to the premise that P implies Q, and P implies Q imply Q do in fact imply Q. But, once again, we have a problem, because in order to assent to Q, we still need to assent to P implies Q, P implies Q imply Q, and P implies Q, and P implies Q imply Q imply Q. As you see, this will continue forever. And, unlike the original Zeno's paradox, the distances will get longer and longer and more difficult to say. Therefore, we can only conclude that Achilles, or anyone else trying to present an argument based on logic, doesn't stand a chance. Check out this and more videos at Carneades.org, and stay skeptical, everybody.